it and asks if it's an original spell. Rio is unsure, so she rephrases, explaining that most magic is cast by reciting existing incantations. Rio explains that incantations are a matter of personal preference and vary from person to person, but Lynn still doesn't quite understand. Nils then reminds Rio the food will be gone if they keep talking, so Rio excuses himself. Abel explains that, according to Rio, incantations are used mainly for show, and he can cast spells without them. This leaves Lynn wondering how such a thing is even possible. The next day, Rio finds his friends gathered around the job board and wonders why they aren't working. They explain that the dungeon is closed, so they plan to take a collection quest on the surface, but there's a surplus in the market, so no one is offering extraction contracts. They ask if Rio is also looking for quests, but he says he's searching for a type of ore he needs for his alchemy practice. They guess he means magic copper ore, which is very expensive, but Rio says it's only 500,000 florins. Ammon points out that's roughly 50 gold coins, and Nils jokes that it must be nice to be that rich. Nils laments that they can't earn anything without jobs, so Rio gets an idea and decides to hire them all to collect magic copper ore. They prepare to head to the abandoned mine near the village of Ruse. About half a day's walk away, Rio offers each of them 4 gold coins, regardless of how much they collect, and an additional 25 gold coins for every piece of magic copper ore they find. His only condition is that they avoid unnecessary danger and return safely. Nils asks if Rio is really sure about this, but Rio points out that 37 gold coins is still less than what he'd pay for the ore in town. However, since it's not a guild job, they won't receive any credit for it. They all happily accept the mission, and Rio returns to his room only to hear some commotion outside. He looks outside and is surprised to see some soldiers bullying a girl, and even more surprised that the one trying to protect her is none other than Dan, the same person Rio had taught a lesson to not long ago. As the knights try to take the girl away, Dan pulls her back and pushes them away. One soldier prepares to strike him, but surprisingly loses his balance and falls. Dan himself seems unsure of what just happened. The knight tries to attack again, but the same thing happens. He ends up on the ground once more. They wonder what's happening. Just then, Phelps suddenly arrives and demands to know what the knights are doing. They tell him not to interfere since he's just an adventurer, but he replies that he's also a nobleman, introducing himself as the heir to House Heinlein, realizing he's the son of the former commander of the Royal Knights. The soldiers are frightened and quickly flee. Phelps praises Dan for his bravery and tells him to take the girl to her friends. He then turns to Rio and asks if he's the one Abel has been praising so highly, introducing himself as the captain of the White Brigade. Phelps says Abel had told him about Rio, but after seeing his magic firsthand, he's certain Rio is truly talented. Rio feels nervous, so Phelps remarks that the knight must have simply slipped, trying not to reveal Rio's powers since he likely wants to keep them hidden. Phelps adds that during their recent mission, Abel was certain it would have been much easier to handle the great tidal bore if Rio had been there. They are then interrupted by Phelps' companion, who reminds him they're running late. Before leaving, Phelps thanks Rio again for dealing with the knights. As they walk away, Rio notes how strong they are, but wonders why the son of a Marquess is working as an adventurer. Later that night, while Rio is enjoying his dinner, Abel interrupts him and asks why he's sitting alone. Rio jokes that he won't pay Abel's bill and that Abel should be treating him instead since he's the senior, but Abel knows how much money Rio has and refuses. When the chef asks what they'd like, Abel orders the daily special. Rio then asks why Abel is alone, teasing that he must be planning to visit the red light district later, catching Abel off guard. When Abel gets defensive, Rio asks if he has a special girl and if it's Lynn, but Abel says she likes Warren, then realizes he said more than he should. Rio remarks it's an unusual pair, but admits love comes in all shapes and sizes. He then asks if Abel is interested in Regia, but Abel quickly denies it. Rio teases him for reacting like a middle schooler, a term Abel doesn't understand. When Rio again asks why he's alone, Abel decides to take him along. They head to the market, where Abel tells Rio that one of the investigators sent to Lune is an old acquaintance of his. The investigator is guarded by Royal Knights, but a few of them are corrupt and have slipped away tonight. Abel's task is to track them down before they cause any trouble. Rio suddenly stops Abel, pointing out some hooded adventurers he doesn't recognize from Abel's welcome party. Abel assumes they're here for dungeon exploration, but Rio reminds him the dungeon is closed. They follow the men into an alley where a hooded man tries to launch a sneak attack on Rio. He blocks it easily and quickly takes them all down with a couple of ice blocks from above. Rio finds them disappointing, expecting more of a challenge. While Abel notices an alchemy box, Rio gets excited, but Abel tells him it's for investigation. Abel learns that the men are actually C-rank adventurers from Jaclair, the capital of Handaliu, and wonders what they were doing there. He decides to hand them over to the city guards. Rio jokes that this is a rare accomplishment for him, but Abel says it's nothing new. Rio then asks if bragging about his adventures to everyone at the party counts as one, prompting Abel to ask how he even knows about that. Meanwhile, as Phelps is walking, the knights from earlier try to attack him in revenge. However, they are intercepted by Shenna, who incinerates them with her fire magic, leaving no trace behind, leaving Phelps impressed. Later, a group of men arrives in town and meets with Hugh, who isn't pleased when they ask him to reopen the dungeon for their investigation and to provide adventurers for their protection. One of the men, Clive Staples, explains that His Majesty has appointed Earl Harold Lawrence, the Minister of Domestic Affairs, as the new head of their research expedition, giving them full authority over the team while they're in the field. However, Hugh reminds them that some requests simply aren't realistic. Clive again emphasizes what it means to have complete authority, but Hugh thinks they've forgotten the meaning of unreasonable. Their leader apologizes for the food situation and says he'll arrange for supplies to be brought in from neighboring towns, but Clive insists the dungeon must be reopened. Hugh pauses for a moment, then agrees, on the condition that if anything happens to his town or its adventurers, the guild will not be held responsible. He firmly adds that if they can't accept that, the dungeon will remain closed. The man agrees. Earl remarks that they can hire adventurers at a good rate, but Hugh tells him it depends on the adventurers themselves. Before they begin the dungeon exploration, Hugh warns them that there are no records of the dungeon's condition after a great tidal bore, so they should proceed with caution. Meanwhile, Rio visits the place where Abel's party stays and thinks their cafeteria must be nice. Before he can go in, a girl approaches and asks about the guild, saying she needs to deliver an important letter there. Rio plans to eat first, but the girl insists. A little later, Rio takes her inside and she hands the letter to Abel, saying it's from Professor Hilarion. Abel reads it and finds that the professor wants him to support the court magicians in their dungeon investigation. Rio asks if the dungeon isn't closed, so Abel explains about the investigation party, a worried look on his face. When Rio asks if something is bothering him, Abel tells him about an A-rank party that never returned, and it wasn't just any A-rank party. Their leader was said to be a superhuman on the verge of S-rank. This means they have no idea what happens inside the dungeon after a great tidal bore. Rio thinks the smart choice would be to stay safe, then excuses himself to have his meal. While the girl thanks him for guiding her, Rihia asks her name, and she introduces herself as Natalie Schwarzkopf. Lynn recognizes her family as the famous water magicians, but Natalie says she's not that impressive. Lynn then asks if Natalie has heard of a spell that can conjure an ice wall some distance from the caster, but Natalie hasn't heard of it either. Abel wonders why Lynn is so obsessed with Rio's abilities, but Lynn protests, saying any magician would be interested in learning a spell like that. Just then, Natalie interrupts to ask if magic like that actually exists, so they tell her that Rio is capable of doing it. On that note, Abel tells them that if they ever fought Rio, not even the four of them together could defeat him, so they might as well give up. Besides, Rio isn't the type to kill anyone. He also advises Natalie that if she ever needs help and they're not available, she can ask Rio, who can usually be found in the guild's room number 10 or in the library. The next morning, Abel meets the team of investigators, while Hilarion explains that this magic device is used to trace mana left in the environment. Anything it detects will be reported to the analysis team in the tent. Abel shows great interest. Hilarion asks if he's begun to like alchemy, but Abel says it's actually his friend who's interested in the subject. This surprises the old man, as he never imagined Abel to be the type who had friends. On the other hand, Rio's friends return with the ore he had requested, so he rewards them generously, making them really happy. Ito notes that the dungeon is surprisingly opened once again, but Rio adds that it's only for D-rank and above adventurers. Meanwhile, Abel's team keeps moving deeper. After 3 days, they reach the 7th floor without encountering any monsters. Hilarion explains that the analysis team on the surface is reviewing their readings, but they haven't found anything unusual yet. Abel thinks they'll need to go deeper. Just then, he notices the researchers from the Royal Central University are in some hurry, so Ryu remarks that they're assuming the monsters from the Great Tidal came from below the 38th level. The next day, Hugh explains that E and F rank parties can't enter the dungeon, but they can take on alternate work by transporting food from other towns, which will require security. He adds that the White Brigade is already involved, but they could use more volunteers. Rio then asks about the color of the stones collected during the Great Tidal Bore, and Hugh tells him they were pale, which surprises him. Meanwhile, the exploration team discovers a strange door in the dungeon. One of the investigators mentions that it might be connected to another place. Clive is thrilled that his team was the first to find this gate, so he orders everyone to set up the equipment and begin examining it immediately. They quickly get everything in place, but as soon as the magic tool touches the dark gate, everyone vanishes from there. In the very next moment, they all find themselves surrounded by a dark abyss. Abel quickly calls out to his comrades, asking if they're alright, and they confirm. He then walks over to Harold and asks him what's going on. Harold replies, saying they've been relocated. At the same time, Clive and his team have been transported somewhere else in the dark abyss as well. Considering their situation, Clive immediately orders the other adventurers to quit standing around and start examining their surroundings at once. They need to stay very cautious because they never know what might appear. While the others are checking the area, one of the adventurers approaches Clive and asks him to explain what just happened. Clive answers that he can't say for sure, but it's most likely they were teleported to this strange place. That's why gathering information about their surroundings is so important right now. Clive believes the gate is most likely responsible for this. Their previous theory claimed that the monsters from the Great Tidal Bore came from below the 38th layer of the dungeon. But with the way things are unfolding now, that theory has clearly been proven wrong. He believes there's a strong chance that the gate itself was the true source of it all. However, as Clive thinks about it for a moment, he realizes this might actually turn out to be a good thing. Discovering the real root of the Tidal Bore would be an excellent finding, especially because it directly contradicts the current prevailing theory. Clive smirks as he realizes that if he can make any vital discoveries during this investigation, it might be enough to get him promoted to department head. Just then, one of the adventurers calls out to Clive, pointing behind him and saying he hears something coming from that direction. Elsewhere, Natalie and two other mages are busy trying to use their magic compass to track down where that group of adventurers was teleported, but they are thrown into confusion because each time the magic compass gives a reading, the result vanishes a second later. A few moments pass, and then the compass briefly shows that the adventurers are on the 40th floor, but just as quickly, the reading disappears.